Kingpin is finally here, the evolved form of Crook Boss, and after grinding to level 20, everyone's asking the same thing. Was it worth it? Because stronger doesn't always mean better, especially when Crook Boss is still one of the most reliable, cost-efficient towers in the game. So we're not just looking at DPS, we're comparing what actually matters, how early you can afford it, cost efficiency, how much value the spawned goons add, how it handles different detections, and how consistent it is in real late game waves, and how fast it can take down enemies. Early game is where Crook Boss still earns its reputation. The biggest advantage is simple. You can get it down without destroying your economy, and it starts contributing right away. Even if the tower itself isn't a top tier DPS machine early, the value comes from the whole package. You're getting a gun on the track, plus extra bodies from the goons helping you clean up. That matters in early waves because early game in TDS is usually about one thing. Don't leak, don't fall behind, don't overinvest. Crook Boss fits that perfectly. It's a stabilizer tower. You drop it, it helps, and you can keep building your money plan. Now compare that to Kingpin. Crook Boss is one of those towers that almost everybody in Tower Defense Simulator has used at least once, and there's a reason it stayed relevant for so long. Because Crook Boss isn't about being the flashiest tower, or having the biggest DPS number on paper. It's about one thing, reliable value for the price, especially when your economy is tight and you just need something that works. So in this video, I'm focusing on what Crook Boss is actually good at when it starts falling off, and why people still run it even with newer towers taking over the meta. First, let's talk early game because that's where Crook Boss earns its reputation. Early waves in TDS are usually about not throwing the match before you even get to mid game. You're trying not to leak. You're trying not to panic buy random towers, and you're trying to build your money plan without falling behind. Crook Boss fits perfectly into that. You place it and you get two sources of value, the tower's own attacks and the goons it spawns helping you clean up. That's the main reason it feels so stable. Even if the tower itself isn't the craziest damage dealer early, the extra bodies on the track help smooth out mistakes and keep the lane under control. And Crook Boss is also just easy to understand. Newer players don't need a complicated setup. You drop it, upgrade it, and it does its job. Now here's something people forget. Crook Boss is a spawn tower, which means there's a trade-off. Whenever it summons a unit, it briefly stops attacking. So the tower's paper DPS isn't always what you feel in game, because there are moments where it's literally not shooting. That doesn't make it bad, it just means Crook Boss is more about overall consistency than perfect DPS uptime. Now let's move into mid-game, where most matches start to reveal the truth. Mid-game is when enemies stop being free, and you actually need your loadout to scale. This is where Crook Boss still contributes, but it starts showing limits. If you're upgrading it and expecting it to transform into a late game carry by itself, you're going to be disappointed. Crook Boss mid-game is more like a strong value anchor. It helps, it supports, it buys time, it can cover lanes and stabilize while your stronger damage towers come online. But against the more demanding parts of the game, it's not the tower you want as your main win condition. And then we hit late game. Late game is where Crook Boss becomes more of a support damage option than a true carry tower. It can still add pressure, the goons still help, but once you're dealing with higher health enemies and bosses, what matters most is scaling and raw power. And Crook Boss simply doesn't have the same ceiling as the best late game options. So here's the honest breakdown. Crook Boss is amazing if you want cheap, reliable value, especially early game. It's great when you need stability, when you're learning, or when you're fitting a tower into a strategy that can't afford to overinvest early. But its weakness is that it tops out. It doesn't keep scaling into I can carry the whole match by myself territory. So if you're asking, is Crook Boss good? Yes, it's good at what it's built for. Just don't judge it like a late game powerhouse, because that's not the job. If you want a tower that feels consistent, saves runs, and gives value without forcing you into some super sweaty setup, Crook Boss is still a solid pick. And if you're running Crook Boss right now, comment what mode you use it in the most. And if it ever saved a match, you should have lost. It might fail in the mid to late game, but it's a great tower for the early game, and it has a total different purpose than the Kingpin.
Kingpin is one of the most hyped things TDS has dropped in a long time because it's not just another tower, it's an evolved tower. It's the level 20 payoff. It's the upgrade people grinded for. So the real question isn't, is Kingpin strong? Obviously it's strong. The real question is Kingpin actually better than Crook Boss in real matches? And is it worth the grind and the in-game investment? Because in Tower Defense Simulator, being stronger on paper doesn't automatically mean you're the better pick for every run. So I'm comparing Kingpin the way TDS players actually should. Cost and timing, upgrade scaling, goon value, how it performs under real wave pressure, and whether it's consistent enough to justify the commitment. First, let's talk about the biggest thing that makes Kingpin different. Kingpin is not trying to be your early game safety net. If you play it like Crook Boss where you expect instant value for cheap, you're going to feel disappointed at the start. Kingpin is an investment tower. It's designed to scale harder the more you commit to it. That means early game you have to be smarter about how you build your economy because you're trying to afford something that doesn't immediately carry the first few waves by itself. And that's where some people get it twisted. They place Kingpin early, don't have enough money to upgrade it properly, and then they blame the tower. But the whole point of Kingpin is what happens after you start upgrading. Now let's talk mid-game because this is where Kingpin starts proving why it exists. Mid-game is when waves demand actual output. Your loadout either scales or it starts leaking. This is where Kingpin separates itself from Crook Boss. As you invest into upgrades, Kingpin's overall contribution becomes way more noticeable. You feel that it scales better, it holds up in tougher situations, and it stays relevant in a way Crook Boss often doesn't. And the best part is that Kingpin doesn't just shoot harder, it improves the whole package, meaning the tower output plus the unit value. That's important because spawn towers in TDS aren't just judged by the tower's gun, they're judged by what the tower plus the units do together across an entire wave. But we also have to mention a huge detail that matters in real gameplay. Like Crook Boss, Kingpin is still a spawn style tower, and whenever it summons units it briefly stops attacking. So it's not just about raw DPS numbers, it's about consistency under pressure, and how much value the summons give you compared to the moments where the tower isn't firing. In mid-game, that trade-off is usually worth it because the scaling starts to kick in and the overall output feels more stable. Now let's get into late game where Kingpin is supposed to shine. Late game in Tower Defense Simulator is all about scaling and reliability. Enemies get way more health, bosses demand real damage, and small weaknesses get exposed. This is where Kingpin is clearly built to outperform Crook Boss. At this stage, the cheap early value advantage matters less because late game doesn't care that your tower was affordable earlier. Late game cares about one thing: can you stay relevant when the game gets brutal? And Kingpin's ceiling is higher. It holds up better when you're dealing with big health pools and boss pressure. It feels like the evolved tower because the scaling actually keeps going. Crook Boss late game can still help, but it starts feeling like extra support. Kingpin late game feels like it can actually be part of the main plan. Now we need to address the biggest downside because Kingpin is not just a free upgrade. Kingpin's weakness is the commitment. First you have to grind Crook Boss to level 20 to even unlock the evolved tower. That alone filters out a lot of players. And then in actual matches, Kingpin still requires enough economy to reach the upgrades that make it truly pop off. So if you're in a match where your cash is tight, or your team is leaking, or you're forced to spend money elsewhere, Kingpin can feel slow to reach its peak. That doesn't mean it's bad, it means you have to build around it and actually support it. So here's the final verdict. Is Kingpin better than Crook Boss? Overall, yes, because Kingpin has the higher maximum potential, and it scales better into the parts of the game where scaling matters most. But Crook Boss still has a place for one reason: accessibility. Crook Boss is easier to afford, easier to use early, and easier to fit into casual strategies without forcing your whole game plan around it. Kingpin is the tower you run when you want to push stronger builds and you're willing to commit to the grind and the upgrades. So if you're trying to build the strongest loadout possible, Kingpin is the goal. But if you want reliable value without the grind and without needing a perfect economy every game, Crook Boss is still solid. If you unlocked Kingpin, was it worth it?
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and comment down below if this update was good or trash.